Today, I want to talk about a side of spirituality that you might not hear about as much. You've heard me and many others talk about the benefits of spirituality, and no doubt we should continue to talk about the joy and the peace and the love that you're going to feel as you embark on the spiritual path, as you take up spiritual practice and implement spiritual living principles into your life. But what we also need to talk about is what's standing in the way of continued spiritual growth and how to work through that. You see, there's a lot that's happening in your unconscious mind that's holding you back from continued spiritual growth. Potentially, if you've been on the path for a year or two, you might be surprised to find that a lot of emotional content is rising to the surface. Feelings of pain and hurt, anger, sadness can come into your consciousness from time to time. And if you're like me, at first you might think that you kind of just got to meditate that away, or that it's not spiritual to be feeling these things, and you should just be able to sort of let that go and feel into that peace and joy. And meditation is a good way to kind of be able to transcend that and kind of like see the higher reality beyond that. But at the same time, we got to make sure that we're not spiritually bypassing and ignoring the things we need to heal for continued spiritual development. We incarnated on this earth to learn certain lessons, and that involves healing the past trauma we went through in this lifetime, potentially even in previous lifetimes as well. You see, experiences you had growing up, adverse experiences, whether it was your parents not being empathic towards you, not meeting your needs, or rather, if you were like me and it was more of being in that schooling environment where maybe people made fun of you or didn't treat you so nicely, you may think that you've overcome that, and you're right to a certain extent. You're living in an adult body. You're not in that circumstance anymore. But the thing is, when these adverse scenarios continued for years at a time, that ingrains certain things in your subconscious mind, certain lack mindsets, certain ideas that you're not worthy of immense spiritual growth and abundance. There may be some idea, you see, because our thoughts and our subconscious beliefs create our reality. So some sort of lack mindset that was implanted in you due to others not treating you with love and kindness, and due to your own mistakes, that kind of built on top of that, ways that you were living unconsciously, that's holding us back from spiritual growth. And it may in large part be unconscious. But what you're going to realize, as you continue to meditate, as you continue to elevate spiritually, this stuff is going to start to come up because it wants to cleanse out of the body for, kind of spirit's going to bring this stuff up out of you to be cleansed. But what you can't do in that moment is run away from it. In the past, we had these coping mechanisms. This is kind of continuing off my previous video, more insights that I've come to. And by the way, don't worry, I'm still going to be talking about, all these spiritual topics of joy and love and peace. That's where we're going, and that's going to be a large part of this channel. But I've been going really deep into this trauma work myself these last few weeks, so I think this is a good time to talk about it and to make these videos. And this is what's holding us back. from those spiritual states. It's important that we heal this trauma that's creating these lack mindsets. So when this starts to come up, you know, the temptation is to retreat into old coping mechanisms potentially. You know, you may think you've overcome these old habits, but once that old pain starts to come up, if you're like me and you have this sort of flight response, there's different responses that different people can have. Some people may have a fight response to where they're going to fight against themselves and fight against other people when this stuff starts to come up. They're going to project. You may project that anger outwards and get pissed off at somebody else when really it's that old sort of fight response that's coming up in you, right? For me, it's a flight response to where when this stuff comes up, all I want to do is go play video games, is run away from the issue, you know, go be by myself and just kind of numb myself. And it's important also, you know, it's a nuanced process. You don't necessarily want to cut that out completely. You want to give yourself some breathing room. Don't beat yourself up if while you're going into the deep hurt that's in your heart that's trying to come up, sometimes you do need that time to rest, to sort of numb yourself and go into those dissociative tendencies. Don't let yourself slip completely back into that, but give yourself some leeway, because it's very difficult to really go into the depths of your wounding. When you start to get to the core of it, it can be very painful. And what's happening is you're kind of going into an emotional flashback of the way that you felt in childhood. You know, that's where reading a book like this can be very helpful. Complex PTSD, you know, I never really thought of myself as somebody that was traumatized or that had emotional flashbacks, but reading this book made me realize that I was traumatized, and I have a lot of work to do in that area to be able to clear all that up so that my true spiritual essence, personality, and values can emerge fully. You know, you kind of want to still keep one eye on the spirituality, maintain your spiritual practice, but there's a time, and you'll kind of know maybe through your intuition or just if this stuff is coming up, you know, don't run away from it, and don't think that, oh, it's not spiritual to be feeling these things. I've been meditating a lot, so I should feel a lot of joy and peace. That's true, but you don't want to run away. There's a time to where you actually need to go down into those hurt feelings of feeling the anger for people that hurt you, feeling the sadness that you felt in childhood, just because it may have been the fact that in those times you didn't have the resources you have now. You weren't an adult. You didn't have the intelligence. You didn't have the resources to really work through this and let it go in a healthy way. You were forced to develop certain coping mechanisms: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are the four that he talks about in this book, Pete Walker. You know, different people will kind of gravitate towards different one of those. Because there was nothing else you could do. You had to adopt certain unhealthy ways of operating to be able to survive in an unhealthy environment. And that wasn't your fault. That was due to the environment that you were in. So it's very important that you start to let these emotions come up and even start to grieve it. You know, you may notice the impulse to cry more. As men especially, sometimes we're taught that it's not okay to cry and that we got to stay strong and sort of maintain that. But what you'll find is that when you allow this to come up and sort of cry, that's releasing it. That's grieving your old life, you know, feeling the good times and the bad times and just letting that all out of your system through crying. And, you know, these were all emotions that we have as humans. It's a full human experience. We're meant to sort of be able to feel into the broad range of all the emotions we have. And, you know, give yourself time. Like if you're going through this period of healing your trauma, have a lot of time of relaxation, have a lot of time of going out in nature, have a lot of movement practices, exercise, swimming, moving the body. Give yourself the time to rest and even the leeway to numb yourself a little bit, you know, through media or whatever it is, when things get very too overwhelming. But over time, you'll develop the capacity to be able to feel into these deep emotional states without needing to numb yourself, and you'll really be able to feel into that and release it and work through it. When you can, because these feelings, remind yourself, whatever feelings are coming up, they can't hurt you if you just sit with it. If you run away from it, that's when it can really eat away at you over time, because you're not addressing the root issue. And you can go meditate and you can feel that joy and peace, but at some point you got to deal with this, or it's going to keep coming back up. It's going to keep impacting your life unconsciously. A lot of this might be unconscious, because for a while I wasn't feeling this. I thought I already worked through it, but like there's still a deeper layer of wounding underneath that you need to access to be able to reach your full spiritual potential, that you need to release. The spiritual teacher Michael Singer has a saying, relax and release, when this stuff's coming up from your heart. And, it doesn't even necessarily require reading a book like this. This is really helpful. This is kind of what primed me to look into all this, and it was very helpful. This book actually focuses more on like the parental side and parental abuse. That wasn't more so what happened to me. It was more so in school that I was traumatized. But, just still Walker explaining like how the child felt in those moments, and like me kind of like flashing back and like realizing like how I felt in some of my darkest times, for years, like certain ways I would feel internally, and just like really coming to understand that at some level it's still impacting my life unconsciously, and that like it's actually, and kind of reframing it as well, that it's actually a blessing to have all this coming up. Some people call it the dark night of the soul if it's a particularly intense time of all this stuff coming back, but it's actually a blessing, because this is the time where you're going to grow the most, where you're going to let old ways of operating that were implanted on you on a deep level, where you're really going to let that release. Yeah, in a sense, like this trauma work is really like working through your karma as well, because as I said, sort of towards the beginning, like we were put here to learn certain lessons, and like going through this experience and then healing it, it's almost like we're not going to have to go through this again in the next lifetime or later in this lifetime. Like, we've worked that out and we've learned these lessons when we can really let that go and live at a higher level than our wounding would have us, want to. Let's see, I'm going to take a look at my notes here real quick. I think there's maybe one or two things that I wanted to touch on here. I think that was about it, actually. I think I kind of touched on all of it. That really, like, just doing this work is going to bring you to, there's a time for spiritual growth, and then there's a time to like kind of like descend and like clear out all the junk, like all this junk that's like holding you down. Like you're trying to like soar into spirit and just transcend all this, but you can't do that when you're being weighed down by past trauma. You can go still, even with all this weighing you down. I've experienced it. You can go into very deep states of meditation, feel the bliss and love and joy, but at some point you're not going to be able to stay there, because this stuff's weighing you down is the issue. So to be able to raise your baseline state spiritually, this is what's required at some point. And there's many different ways of doing it. You can just literally sit there and feel through it and let it release without necessarily needing to go into all the details. Or you can do a lot of journaling about it and really like feel back into and look into what happened. I think that if you really want to release this and grow spiritually, God will show you the way, right? Even through videos like this one, through books you come across, like what I have here. There's another one here, The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma. This is kind of more of like a clinician's guide to help other people do it, but it's also very like useful to see how you can implement this on yourself. And actually, I'm only about a third of the way through this book, but I really like it, and I'd recommend it. It's not quite like as like heavy as a book like this. I feel like it's still going into how to heal yourself, but it's more of just like okay, here's how you do it, and here's some examples. It's not quite as, but like at first I was like, dang, this is like a really dark, like gritty book, but like it really, like that's what you need sometimes to like get back into that and heal it, But anyway, yeah, and in the coming weeks, I'll be back to talk about like more spiritual topics. The next video I have, almost kind of leading off of this one, is, kind of what is karma? How do you work through your karma? And like a lot of ideas surrounding that. So stay tuned for it. As I said, kind of working through this trauma is the karma work, but I'm going to go into the more spiritual side of it in the next video. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe and like the video. And if you want to work with me, I run a spiritual fellowship group where we meditate and talk about spiritual truth together, as well as just all around personal development. So check the description for that. You can set up a 30-minute free call with me, or you can send me a DM on Instagram or Substack, and I'd love to talk to you and see what makes sense. But regardless, I wish you the best of luck on your journey. Just know that there's a time in spiritual growth when we're going to have to address things that we've repressed, emotions that we've buried, that we've kept on pushing down. But all that wants to come up and release so that you can live your most spiritual, authentic life. It's all a part of the process. There's going to be joy and pain, joy and sorrow, happiness and sadness. It's the dualistic nature of the world that we're living in. It's all part of the process. And it's a blessing because this is what's going to unearth our true spiritual essence. So I wish you the best on your journey, and I'll see you very soon on the next one.